Go Nancy, I just have to say before I start. Okay, so it's 1984, and the place is Taunton, Massachusetts. It's a post-industrial city where it's in transition from becoming the Silver City to it still hasn't figured out what it's going to become. I'm 12 years old, and I end up spending a lot of time hanging out in the housing project in my town. And spending so much time there that at a certain moment, I'm leaving school one day, and I get jumped by a group of girls who found that it was not such a great thing for an outsider to be coming into their neighborhood. So 2 black eyes, a concussion, and a broken nose later, I realized I had crossed a border, and I met conflict on a very small scale. And that has helped shape some of the work that I do now. I'm a neogeographer, and neogeography is about scaling participation in map making. And in this sense, scale is impact. And it's impact because those who create the maps are represented on the map. And for centuries, maps have been created by the people in power, and that's the picture we have of the world. And now, through organizations like OpenStreetMap that allow people, anybody, to create maps, we're able to get a picture of the world that is more about the many than of the few. You have Mikel Marone from OpenStreetMap that is right now mapping the largest slum in Africa, in Kibera. You've got his work creating a tourist map of Gaza, showing restaurants. So it is in these small efforts and in this ability to make maps that we can change the picture of our world. Okay, so the picture we have of borders, say maps that we see on CNN, look permanent. There looks like there's a clean line between us and them. But up close, they're fluid, and they're social, and they're jagged, and they're complicated, and they're rich, and they're interesting. So take that interplay, and then you realize, okay, maps, conflict, border, personal. So there are these personal borders that we control, and that's something that my talk is going to address today. It's particularly important now, because I'm going to show slides. Now, it's particularly important now because our borders are about to be redrawn, potentially by the citizens that are creating the maps, that's my hope, but potentially by more conflict, by access to natural resources and the scarcity, and it has the potential to breed more conflict over these new borders as they're drawn. So let's look at a couple of maps. This is a cartogram from World Mapper. A cartogram is a map that changes the shape of countries based on one data set. This data set is based on tourism, tourist destinations. And so you can see that Europe up there is huge. It's bloated. And that little thing underneath it hanging off, that's Africa. So the thing about tourism is that, say there are 650 million approximately tourist trips a year. And if you look at people crossing multiple times, what you get is data that says that less than 10% of us are crossing a border for tourism. Why is that bad? This is a different map. It looks similar, doesn't it? It is a map of the profits, the net tourism, the money coming into countries from tourism. The only difference really between this map and others is the US is a little bigger and Africa is a little smaller. So there are about 10% of territories in the world that are taking 72% of those tourist receipts. Now, there are 3 things to walk away from with those 2 maps. 1, we're not crossing borders right now, today. 2, by not crossing them, we're reinforcing economic disparity that exists in the world. And 3, if you notice these tourist receipts, you also notice that it's much more difficult for people in the poorer countries to cross into the richer countries. So it is our responsibility to think about crossing in the way where there's actually easy and safe to do so. This is another map. This is a map of aquifers, underground water reserves around the world. And this is made by UNESCO. And it took 10 years in the making because in order to map this, you have to deal with every government that has water, which is everybody. Those blue lines that running through that surface water and all of the big rich colors underneath, that's the groundwater. So there is 100 times more groundwater than there is surface water. This is a tremendous amount of water, which is becoming a more and more scarce resource. What we see when we drill down into this map, which you don't have to do with me today, but trust me on this, what we see is that there are 273 cross-border aquifers. meaning that governments on both sides have to agree how this water is used. They have to agree on how it's mined, how to prevent it from being polluted. And actually, those 273 aquifers have the chance to increase conflict, not decrease. So with all of this happening, conflict, borders, whether we're talking about the ghetto in my hometown or we're talking about the rest of the world globally, it's been riddled with conflict. Let's talk about a very famous border. This is the border between Israel and the West Bank. And this is a very interesting border because people on both sides are not allowed to cross. It's very difficult for people on both sides to cross, and in some cases it's illegal. So I happened to be in Israel in July, and I said, okay, I got together with my friend from MIT, Josh Levinger, and we said, okay, we're going to make a map of crossing this border. So we started in Jerusalem, and what we saw was some borders that we would expect to see. This is the invisible armistice line. This is with the barrier added to it, the physical wall. These are checkpoints. These are the military checkpoints. How do you draw the shape of that? Why don't we see that on CNN? The interesting thing is that when we boarded the bus to get to Shufat camp, which was our destination, we had already crossed the border. The language was different. The dress was different. It's impossible to draw a line between us and them. The very inspiring thing was that when we got off the bus in Shufat camp, what we found were pockets of familiarity. We found bridges, and there was no more talk of borders. We expected to see rubble. We expected to see poverty. It is a refugee camp. But what we didn't expect to see, for some reason, is the butcher, the baker, and the Barbie pillow and Spider-Man pillows that we saw at the market. These things were so familiar, it was like we could have been anywhere in the world. And then I met a child. I was in line buying candy at a market, and in front of me was a mom and her 4-year-old son. So I have kids, and I have this bad habit of pretending that they're all mine, and I want to interact with kids everywhere I go. So he looks back at me, and I smile at him. And like any 4-year-old boy would do anywhere, he puts his face in his mother's dress out of shyness, and then he turns back around. I smile at him again, and again he shies away. On the third time, he smiled back. And that was such a meaningful exchange for me. Kids haven't yet built these personal borders that we carry around with us. They're free to interact with whoever they want to. They're free to have simple exchange. And so we went back with a map that was more about the familiar than about the foreign. And except when we went to cross the border again, and we were at one of these checkpoints, and of course a really big military guy with a machine gun boarded the bus and took our passports, and I don't speak Hebrew or Arabic, so I was very concerned. Anyway, this is apparently the normal part of the process. That's a famous example. How many people in this room spend time with their friends who live in East Palo Alto, who go there for dinner? The borders that we carry with us are as real in Silicon Valley as they are in the Middle East. And, as Churchill said, we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. But in this case, we create our maps, thereafter they shape us. The cool thing about now is that with social mapping, with the concepts of neogeography that put tools in the hands of millions of people to make their own maps and their own picture of the world, we can now go back in and recreate our map. And that's what we're trying to do. So, in closing, the great thing about this is that everyone in this room has the power to go and cross a border. What do you do when you get there, right? If you don't know somebody on the other side, you can make a map, you can take pictures, you can tell a story, you can have simple exchange, having a meal with someone. These small acts of exchange are what we're missing because we're all so busy thinking big that we forget to think small. So I would like to pose to you guys today, this amazing crowd, that you consider a very humble act of diplomacy, crossing. Thank you.